In 2021, Vauhini Vara published an essay called Ghosts. In Ghosts, she used an early model of ChatGPT to help her write a story about her older sister's untimely death, something that she admits she was never really able to write about on her own. She writes an introduction, and then she copies her conversation with ChatGPT largely unaltered onto the page. The formatting of the essay makes it clear what was written by Vara and what was written by ChatGPT. Now that so many of us have access to ChatGPT, we might not be as interested in reading someone else's conversation with the bot, but this is 2021, and most of the readers hadn't seen this sort of technology before. So either because of an interest in the technology itself or because of an interest in Vara's writing and her story, the essay went viral. Then, 2 years later, Vara published a second essay, this one called Confessions of a Viral AI Writer, reflecting on the experience and commenting on how generative AI had changed in the 2 years since she first interacted with it. Both essays are linked in the description. Her second essay, which I'll just call Confessions, ends with this question. I have no doubt that AI will become more powerful in the coming decades, and along with it, the people and institutions funding its development. In the meantime, writers will still be here, searching for the words to describe what it felt like to be human through it all. Will we read them? I believe that in Vara's writing itself and in how we interact with it as readers, we can find the answer to her question. But to lead us into that discussion, let me first answer her question with another question. Why do we read in the first place? In Confessions, Vara first mulls over a different question. Why do we write? And then she gives us this delicious explanation, courtesy of Zadie Smith. I recalled Zadie Smith's essay Fail Better, in which she tries to arrive at a definition of great literature. She writes that an author's literary style is about conveying the only possible expression of a particular human consciousness. Literary success, then, depends not only on the refinement of words on a page, but on the refinement of a consciousness. And then Vara goes on to say, I know what consciousness means to me as a writer. For me, as for Smith, writing is an attempt to clarify what the world is like from where I stand in it. That definition of writing couldn't be more different from the way AI produces language, by sucking up billions of words from the internet and spitting out an imitation. Nothing about that process reflects an attempt at articulating an individual perspective. And while people sometimes romantically describe AI as containing the entirety of human consciousness because of the quantity of text it inhales, even that isn't true. The text used to train AI represents only a narrow slice of the internet, one that reflects the perspective of white, male, Anglophone authors more than anyone else. The world as seen by AI is fatally incoherent. If writing is my attempt to clarify what the world is like for me, the problem with AI is not just that it can't come up with an individual perspective on the world, it's that it can't even comprehend what the world is. So, I agree with her. I don't think that AI can replace the writing process, the refinement of a consciousness, as Zadie Smith put it. A lot of people might think, if I could just finish writing a book, if I could just get my thoughts on paper, then it would get published and celebrated. And maybe we think that validation is what would fill the void. If we look at novel writing from that perspective, then sure, ChatGPT can help us write a book, in the sense that it can help us actually finish the damn thing. And maybe it can even help us write something that gets published. But if you think that taking shortcuts so that you can finish and publish a book is what will save your tortured soul, then you will often end up disappointed. As the author Matt Bell wrote, publishing a book might change your life if you're very lucky, but it probably won't change you or how you feel about being you. The actual writing might, though. If anything about being a writer can save you, it's what happens at the desk. The novel Cujo by Stephen King was, by most definitions of the phrase, a successful book. It sat comfortably at the top of the bestsellers list, it was optioned for a blockbuster movie, and it won multiple prestigious awards. But when King wrote the book, he was at the peak of his drug and alcohol addictions. ChatGPT wouldn't exist for another 40 years or so, but was Stephen King's shortcut. That's what he used to write faster. That's what he used to find inspiration. Due to his addiction, King does not remember writing the book at all. He read the book years later and he said that he likes it. And it pains him that he never got that special artist and art relationship that you would normally get when you're writing a book. So when King talks about Cujo in his memoir On Writing, he doesn't talk about the success of the novel. He doesn't brag or celebrate the shortcut that he found to finishing a great book. He just wishes he remembered writing it. I spent 4 years trying to get to that finish line of completing a novel. And then when I did finish writing my novel, I became sad and lethargic, almost as if I were grieving. I missed writing my book. I missed the ritual of sitting in a cafe with a coffee and unraveling the balls of yarn that were my emotions through fiction. I missed inhabiting the fictional world of my book. I missed the hope of not knowing what my book would become or who would read it or where it would go. Even if someone came to me during the writing process and said, ChatGPT can write your novel exactly as you would write it, in your voice, the same final product, just years sooner, I probably still wouldn't have taken that deal. And if I did, I would have missed out on the most fun, transformative part of being a writer, which is writing. So Vera and I agree on this. From the writer's perspective, ChatGPT can't replace us. But in this essay, Vera points out something that I hadn't seen other writers do in the same way before this. She says, if readers enjoy the final product, does the writer even matter? In Confessions, Vera mentions people who use AI to generate bedtime stories for their kids, and people who are satisfied with the writing the AI creates. They find something that they're looking for in AI-generated text. Vera writes, if this type of literature satisfies readers, the question of whether it can match human-produced writing might well be judged irrelevant. And this is where I disagree with her. Now, for us writers, the reader is like the most beautiful girl in the 10th grade, and we are all her humble suitors. We think about her far more than she thinks about us. We mull over how to please her, and she has the ability to either elate us with a moment of her attention or destroy us with her thoughtless indifference, and she often doesn't even notice her own power. So it makes sense that writers might nobly say, well, if the reader is happy, then who even cares about me? And then privately spiral into an identity crisis. When Vera was reflecting on the success of Ghosts, the short story that she wrote along with ChatGPT about her sister's death, she admitted that she thinks ChatGPT wrote the best parts of the original essay. But as a reader, I have a confession as well. When I read Ghosts, I originally tried to read what ChatGPT wrote, and then I got bored and I scrolled past it to just get to the parts that Vera wrote. I just wanted to hear what Vera had to say. So we established that AI can't really replace a writer's relationship with their own art. But I would argue that by definition, artificial intelligence can't completely satisfy the reader either. And to explain why, I'll go back to my original question. Did you think I forgot? Why do we read? There are arguments to be made that we approach art because we want to be entertained, because we want to learn something, because we want to escape life's burdens for a moment. All of those reasons combine to draw us into a song or a painting or a dance that someone else made for us. But I believe that another core pillar of why we seek out art is connection. If Vera claims that writing is an attempt to clarify what the world is like from where I stand in it, let's not forget the next, arguably more important step. When someone reads that supposedly solitary, unique perspective and says, I feel like that too. And then suddenly, we don't all feel so lonely anymore. So humans are tortured by awareness. We are, as far as we know, the only species that has evolved enough to truly understand that we will die someday, and it plagues us. But we can find refuge in the fact that when one of us dies, at least there are other people who are similarly conscious. I heard a perspective once that thinking that when you die, consciousness ceases to exist would be like thinking that when a light bulb goes out, electricity ceases to exist. So great art has the same utility as a psychedelic mushroom trip. You take these weights, these parts of yourself that you think are uniquely damaged and heavy and lost, and then someone else mentions them and you realize that this whole time you've been sharing that weight, which makes it lighter. It's especially true when a book or a work of art or a song expresses something so private and so vulnerable that you've never even said it out loud, meaning it must have cropped up organically in both your mind and theirs, and you realize that there may exist something like a collective consciousness, which would mean that even when you die, the human experience, the act of being conscious, a human being, it lives on. And that connection can relieve us of our constant fear of death for a moment. It can quiet the incessant self-importance of the ego. And we need this human connection. We need to be loved in the same way that we need water. We need other people. In the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, Bruce D. Perry and Maya Silavitz write, for years, mental health professionals taught people that they could be psychologically healthy without social support, that unless you love yourself, no one else will love you. The truth is, you cannot love yourself unless you have been loved and are loved. The capacity to love cannot be built in isolation. But fulfilling that social need is demanding. You have to pay your social dues. You have to text first. You have to do favors. You have to forgive. You have to risk being traumatized. But we can find something similar to social connection with a fictional character or the voice of an author, the plot of a story. When I read Ghosts by Vauhini Vara, I didn't want to see an algorithm put words together in something that resembled a sentence. I wanted to know what she went through and how she felt about it. Then that could help me feel less alone in my own grief, with my own psychological burdens. She thinks that ChatGPT wrote the best parts of the story, but of course she does. She already knows the true story. I don't. I want to know what happened. I want to connect with a stranger, another person. By definition, only a person can give me that. And this does apply to fiction as well. As Greta Gerwig said about her movie Lady Bird, none of it happened, but it's all true. Although fiction isn't something that technically happened, it still must ring true. It still has to offer me a form of connection, even if it's with a fictional character. Vera said that she thought one of the best parts of the essay Ghosts was when ChatGPT wrote a line about her and her sister holding hands. But she admits that her and her sister in real life were never so sentimental. ChatGPT tends to lean towards this more sanitized, hokey version of events, but human grief isn't clean and simple. It has sharp edges and a slimy underbelly. But even if ChatGPT wrote a more true version of her relationship with her sister, I still wouldn't have been able to connect with what the robot wrote because it wouldn't bring me a connection with another person. It can't give me that. A great writer is not only technically perfect, a great writer is also capable of acknowledging your vulnerability while simultaneously offering you her vulnerability, her own fears, so that you can connect as lost, conscious beings. If great writing gives you a personal connection, a moment's respite from loneliness, then a great writer understands how to create and foster those connections. In other words, a great writer understands people. Vera wonders if people will still read the words written by human writers, but she answers her own worries in her writing by showcasing her remarkable ability to connect with the people who are reading her work. As an example of Vera's writing prowess, every essay that I read by her about artificial intelligence incorporates a lighthearted joke around like paragraph 2 or 3, like this. When the New York Times had ChatGPT come up with a fake modern love column, it wrote, "We went out for dinner, we went out for drinks. We went out for dinner again. We went out for drinks again. We went out for dinner and drinks again." I had never read such an accurate modern love in my life. Vera incorporates that humor up front because I assume she understands that reading about artificial intelligence can be uncomfortable. So she breaks the tension. She takes on a more jovial tone when appropriate. How does she know how to do this? Well, she's also human, so she probably feels a bit tense about the topic as well. She uses her own vulnerability and her fears to hold out her hand, and us, as readers, understanding these complex emotions, reach out and take it. Social interactions are perhaps the most complex thing that our brains are capable of. While including a joke around paragraph 2 may sound simple enough, connections between people are in reality so infinitely complicated that they might not ever really fit into an algorithm. I say this because if we want to teach a robot to understand us, then we have to understand ourselves, and I don't believe we do. When they first made dating apps, they tried to have people fill out forms describing themselves and what they look for in a partner, and then they matched people based on similar interests and similar standards. And predictably, this didn't work at all. People described what they looked for in a partner, then fell in love with someone who was the complete opposite, because love was never something that we can explain or quantify. We're worried about AI becoming too human, but do we even know what it means to be human? We'll spend our whole lives trying to understand ourselves, and we will barely scratch the surface. And what about you, ChatGPT? Are you putting in the work? Have you had a conversation with your inner child? Have you looked directly into the eyes of the shadow self? One of the spectacular things about writing is that sometimes we reveal ourselves without even meaning to. When I read Ghosts, I only started crying when I read these lines written by Vara. "I felt like a ghost. At night my sister would appear in my dreams. In the dreams she hadn't died, it had all been a misunderstanding, and she felt hurt that I had accepted it as real and continued on with my life as if life could go on." These words were moving to me because this is when Vara, either intentionally or unintentionally, reveals a common aspect of grief, which is guilt. This fear that moving on from a loved one's death would be a betrayal to them, like if you let go of your pain, you would also be letting go of your love. We have trouble acknowledging, let alone understanding, these contradictory aspects of human existence. I don't think we can seek to replicate them through artificial intelligence. Sometimes the best we can hope to do is explore these emotions through our art, and sometimes look up from the page to find that someone else has been exploring these emotions as well. And thus, art becomes a three-part conversation, a triptych of reader, writer, and the words that attempt to unite them. ChatGPT's quest for perfection can actually limit its ability to be more human or a better writer or a better conversationalist. Some of us can relate. Part of the reason why AI detectors give false positives is because if a piece of writing has been proofread and it's grammatically correct and clean, then the AI detector assumes it was written by AI and not by a human. And if a piece of writing was riddled with grammatical errors, then the AI detector assumes it was written by a person. Vera wrote in Confessions, "ChatGPT's voice is polite, predictable, inoffensive, upbeat. Great characters, on the other hand, aren't polite. Great plots aren't predictable. Great style isn't inoffensive, and great endings aren't upbeat." Being grammatically correct is not the same thing as being creative. Nietzsche theorized that the creative process involves two parts: the wild creative fervor, which he represented with the great god Dionysus, and the ordered discipline of structure, which he represented with the half-brother of Dionysus, Apollo. You must be possessed by a balance of both of these gods in order to make a fantastic creative work. Much writing advice embodies a combination of the Apollonian and Dionysian forms of creation, such as Peter Devey's idea to write drunk and edit sober, or Gustave Flaubert's advice to be regular and orderly in your life like a bourgeoisie so that you may be violent and original in your work. ChatGPT has a lot of Apollonian creativity, the grammatical correctness, the three-act structure, the tied up with a bow, happy ending. That's why it sounds corporate, like a LinkedIn post. But it has little to no Dionysian creativity. It cannot dance. It hasn't been visited by the muses. It knows nothing of Dionysus, the god of wine and festivity and fertility and insanity and ecstasy. Vera talks about asking ChatGPT about herself and tricking it into revealing its, quote, essential bleep bloopiness. She invented, as far as I know, the phrase bleep bloopiness, but it's perfect. I know exactly what she means. When I write it in this essay, Grammarly underlines it in red and tells me it's not a word and advises me to change it. Word invention is a perfect example of Dionysian creativity. Not technically perfect, but perfectly creative. So Vera, to answer your question about whether or not writers will still read about what it felt like to be human throughout it all, I know that I will still be reading. At the very least, I will still be feeling human. And I know that you will be too. So continue reaching out your hand in your art, and every once in a while, another human being will see it and take it.